Welcome to another conversation with Joe Reagan. So, Joe, what's the topic for today? I know it's a hot topic, and I can tell you that you're pulling out the bit to try to get this thing out there for your public.
Gary, do you like math?
What?
Do you like math?
Math?
Math.
Do I have to take my shoes off?
Maybe.
Oh, okay. Well, hang on.
It's not hard math. The funny thing is, so people, there's always this misnomer that everyone says, I don't like math. And it's because sometimes math is tricky, especially when we have to do it on our, like you said, when we have to take our shoes off to make sure that we're counting our ones or twos. But math is funny because it doesn't lie. And I remember a couple of years ago, I got in a conversation with somebody and I started throwing out some ideas, some figures. And it was a Trumper, and we're having this conversation. And I can't remember what the argument was, but I remember he starts questioning. He was like, where did you get that information? How do you know that? And I was like, well, it's basic math. And he kind of looked at me like, what are you talking about, basic math? I'm like, but that was the end. Like, the issue is that we were talking about is the GOP budget philosophy, the mathematics simply don't work.
Well,
and the Doge cuts are a fantastic example of that. And this is an example of how back of the envelope math now, right now, and I'm gonna go deep. So if you want to sleep tonight,
okay,
we're gonna get into some math, and that can put all of you to sleep. Go ahead.
Two things.
Yes.
Figures don't lie, but liars can figure.
That's true.
Okay, that's
very true.
And when you mentioned Doge, finish it. Doge bags.
I want to keep it family friendly, right? This should be a lesson you can bring to your children and say, hey, when you hear people talk about these things on TV, on the radio, if you meet them in person, it's not hard to question these things, right? It is a well-known fact that for the past, I think about 5 years now, I think we're 5 or 6 years that the U.S. government has run a $1 trillion deficit. Okay,
yeah.
That's a big number, and it is concerning. So this whole argument that the U.S. deficit, the federal deficit, and the U.S. debt, the federal debt, is a national security issue. That is a true statement. And if you go back and you look at when that started to come about, it was the Rand Corporation did a pretty in-depth assessment back in the early 2000s, I think. And what's really important, this is where context matters. So we're not getting to the math yet, but the context around the math here is the reason that the federal deficit is a national security issue is that when you start spending money to service that debt, the interest payments on the debt, when that gets to a certain level, it starts to erode away the amount of money that we can now spend on key programs. And that can be everything from national security, healthcare, schools, all these things. And so this Rand report kind of digs that out and says, listen, once we get to a certain level, we're going to be spending far more servicing the debt than we can on actual programs. And that actually is a place that we are today. We are currently spending, I'm looking over at my cheat sheet here, we are spending $952 billion annually to service the national debt.
You're talking interest.
That is just the interest payment, yes. Okay. Now, go ahead.
Well, when you say a national security threat, when China, Russia, England, let's throw the Saudis in there for good measure, are buying our debt, I can see where that can be a national security issue.
That's actually not the issue, because it's not how debt works. So debt is traded. At the end of the day, when we talk about the federal debt, we're talking about treasury bonds. Mm-hmm. And those are for sale in the free market. Sometimes people sit there and say, well, if China owns all this debt, they can just call us on it. It doesn't work that way. Right? Just like your mortgage. Like your bank can't call you up one day and be like, hey, you know what? It's great that we had this 30-year mortgage deal, but we're going to have you need to pay that off tomorrow. That's not how it works, right? China could dump debt onto the market, and all it would mean was somebody else would pick it up. And it's part of the free market system. This is why the U.S. cooperation in the international system has been such a great advantage to the United States. And so the national security component to this is that, right, there is a risk where at some point the U.S.'s ability to pay the service interest on that debt comes into question. And to put this into perspective, right? So a lot of conservatives or faux conservatives like to talk about federal spending in terms of a credit card, right, which is revolving debt. And that's not a good analogy because revolving debt is completely different than what a treasury bond would look like. A treasury bond would be the best analogy, and it's not a perfect analogy, but the best analogy is really thinking of a mortgage payment. Because when we are taking on debt in the federal government, it's generally speaking going to do something. And we measure our debt as compared to the gross domestic product. So a couple figures that you break out, right? So one of the areas that let's use the China-U.S. comparison here, because a lot of people say, well, the Chinese market is growing and they're about to surpass the United States. In terms of total gross domestic product, that is true. But when you break that out per capita, China then falls actually down closer to just slightly above Iraq in terms of its per capita GDP. Because when you go back to GDP is a measure, but it's the total amount of money that's being spent across an economy. And so that per capita, so that per person, GDP is a lot more important. And that figure comes back, and it really does kind of fall in line with average salary across the United States, which last year the average salary for an American was $65,470. So my mortgage analogy here, the average home price in the United States is about a little under $420,000 is the average cost of a home. So if you're doing so again, your math there is that means that your home is about 614% of your income annually. Okay? Basic math. On the other end of that, per capita, so every if we take the federal deficit, which is $36 trillion, and then we divide that by all Americans, it's about $105,000 per person, which is closer to 162% of our per capita GDP. Now, I say that with caution. It's not to downplay the fact that debt is an issue. It is to say, though, that, hey, if we think of the household spending, we're within that spectrum of this is something we should be looking at, but it's not abnormal. Let's leave it at that. It's not abnormal. But where we have that interest obligation, every dime that we're spending on interest, right? You got to pay you got to pay the mortgage first. Every dime that's getting paid, it's paying interest, that is stuff that cannot be going towards other programming. So here's where it gets fun. So the GOP passed their budget resolution, and they're calling for $2 trillion in budget cuts this year, which of course they're not going to achieve because the budget resolution that they just had extended the budget another 6 months. So at the end of the day, we're not going to get a budget passed. You're not going to see $2 trillion in cost savings across the government. But what you are going to see is $4.6 trillion in tax cuts. And those tax cuts are going, generally speaking, to the top 1% to 2% of Americans. These are not going to middle-class Americans. These are not going to most of us. And so if we were to take Doge at its word, and they have consistently over the past 2 weeks been walking back their estimates as to what their savings. But the last one number I pulled said that Doge is saying that they were able to have $105 billion in savings, which is, again, the math on that is about 11% of the $1 trillion deficit that we're running without any tax cuts. Now, more conservative estimates have Doge as low as $65 billion in cost savings. And these numbers don't even take into account the fact that some of these investments also have return on investments. So, right, this whole thing, like when you talk about Veterans Affairs, there's been studies that have been done that says for every dollar we spend on Veterans Affairs, $7 is put back into the economy in one way or another. And that's right. This now we're getting a little bit more complex finance here. But when we talk about return on investment on federal dollars, it's not just the spending. That money actually grows as it gets out into the marketplace. When you look at these road construction projects, all of these things are feeding growth in our community. And again, I've got that fancy business degree, and this is what we spent years studying how money works in these systems. So at the end of the day, here's another fun one, right? We've talked about all the layoffs that are occurring within the federal workforce. And again, they're saying oh, well, this is saving money. These people aren't doing anything, all this. Do you happen to know, Gary, off the top of your head, how much is the federal government's payroll?
I think, and I'm guessing it's probably about 2 or 3% of the overall total budget.
It is, yeah, that's about right. It's about
Yes.
It's about 2%. It's about 2% of gross domestic product. So
Okay.
it's a little bit more in the budget, but the total. Actually, I can do that right now. I guess I could. What is? I don't know the. I did. That was the one number I didn't pull. Was the actual budget figure? I got the deficit. I didn't pull the actual one. But $336 billion a year is what the U.S. government spends on payroll. So go back to that target of if we're going to make if we have $1 trillion deficit, if we fired every lazy federal employee, all of them, get rid of them all, 34% of the $1 trillion deficit. So it's got to come, which leads us to where the GOP finally came out and said it this week. The only way that we're going to get to our cost savings goal, according to the GOP, we got to cut Medicare.
Uh-huh.
Now, do you think?
And don't forget the $880 billion on Medicaid.
And that's right. That's and it's funny because then you go back and you say, because that is the answer, right? They've come back and said, this is the only thing we can do. The only way we can do this is we got to cut Medicare, Medicaid, and we got to deal with Social Security. It's the only way we can fix this. Only way. Gary, do you believe that that's the only thing that we could do?
Oh, no, hardly. I think the billionaires who pay very little in taxes now, we have to go back, and this is way before your time, before you were a twinkle in your old man's eye, that the tax rate over, I think it was $100,000 back in Eisenhower's time was 91%.
Yep.
Okay?
Yep. All right.
Now, if we went back to that, I think we could start rebuilding the interstate highway system. We can improve our airports. And let's not forget, if we pull the cap off Social Security and taxed every blanking dime a billionaire makes, including their, shady transfers of funds from here to there, we wouldn't have to worry about Social Security going insolvent.
Well,
and we probably could pretty well bankroll Medicaid.
That sounds good.
It is good. Come on.
But this is about putting people to sleep, Gary. So what does the math tell us? Right? Let's go back to the boring math. There's 340 million people in this country, which means the top 1% is about 3.4 million people. Mm-hmm. That 3.4 million people have a collective net worth of $43 trillion.
Changing the couch.
So, wait. Now, this is not related to that number. But if you Google, how much do you have to make annually to be in the top 1% of income earners in the United States? Do you know what that number is?
Scare me.
It is $787,000 a year with some change. So if we were to take, so now this is back of the envelope math, right? So this is not all inclusive. It's meant to kind of be that check of like, hey, does this make sense?
Yeah.
So let's get crazy. Let's take that $2 trillion in cost savings and let's divide that by the 3.4 million people that make up the 1% of Americans in terms of wealth. These are the people that own the $43 trillion. Mm-hmm. Do you know what that number makes?
No, tell me. Enlighten me.
$43,000.
Really?
I had to check that like 3 times. I was like, there's no way that's right. I was expecting it to be quite more. So here's the real irony. Do you know the percentage of what you get if you divide what $237,000 gets when you break that out into the $787,000 that you have to make to be in the top 1%?
Enlighten me.
30%. So, and to put that in comparison, the current tax brackets. So if we made no adjustments to the current tax bracket, if you make more than $640,000 a year, you are paying 37% tax on that wealth above the 620 mark.
Okay.
Envisioning the fact that, of course, this 3.4 million people that make up the 1% have, many of them are making well beyond that $740,000 a year. It would not require, now this is where I did this, and also just to caveat all of this math was done in the 30 minutes prior to you and I getting onto this phone call. So, the next step for me would be to sit there and say, okay, let's really dig into this, because we already know that in theory, these people should already be paying about 37% on the higher end of their wages. We know there are tax loopholes, and we know that the 88,000 new IRS employees were supposed to go and look towards the higher income earners to find those folks that were cheating on taxes to make sure they were fully pulling that revenue. But when you do that math, it really does say, hey, it really would only require that top 1% to give maybe 1 to 2% more in a percentage tax increase, and you've already recouped the $2 trillion in, you don't have to, you've recouped all that loss that you have within your deficit. You've balanced the budget by literally asking 1% of the American population to pay 2% more on their taxes. And that's the tricky thing about math, because when you ask a Republican, the only answer is you got to cut Medicare and Medicaid. And, well, I'm sorry, my friends, math doesn't lie.
That's right.
The GOP does. And Jeff Crank voted along with every one of his peers to buy into this nonsense, that the only way that we can survive is to ask those citizens that require that use Medicare, Medicaid. And we talked about this last week, right?
Yeah.
When you cut Medicare, Medicaid, you are not achieving cost savings.
No.
You will end up spending more money on healthcare in the long run, which means you're actually increasing the deficit. And if you and I know you had a couple questions to me, and I want to stop because I think that's enough math for people. We've already lost the folks that have gone to sleep. Many people have gone cross-eyed. I probably should have had a whiteboard so I could do the whole Dave Ramsey, driving things all over the place. But one of the things that he said about this $4.6 trillion in tax cuts that the GOP wants to give to that same 1%. Right. I didn't do the math and breaking that out what that might look like, but obviously if I'm saying I'm asking them to pay 1% to 2% more in order to make up the $1 trillion deficit, and he's saying, well, we can give a 4.6 trillion in cuts to those same people, and somehow, and Jeff Crank's exact words were, it should create a bunch of jobs. And this is where math gets fun, right? Like you said.
Well, how about this? Jeff Crank introduced legislation called the Block Act, okay, which is to deprive cities who are sanctuary cities of road funds. Okay. Now, or infrastructure funds. Now, here's the whole irony of the thing. By his legislation, if it passes, he shoots the state of Colorado right in the ass, because it will affect the Front Range rail system that they're planning from Pueblo up to Fort Collins. They won't be able to build it. Now, how many jobs are we talking about there? And how much local income will be generated by building that rail line? But if Crank's legislation passes, the Front Range rail line goes away. That's real smart.
Well, have we done an immigration one? We got to put that one on the list. I don't think I've done an immigration one yet.
No, we haven't done an immigration one.
Stay tuned. Next week we'll do immigration, because we got a whole thing we can go on that one.
What I did is I crunched some numbers. I used to do it for a living. And we know that he voted on cutting the Medicaid, and he'll vote on cutting Medicare and veterans bits. Okay, we know that.
Yep.
And so,
which, by the way, for those that remember, in debates, I called him on that. So as a politician, you should never say "I told you so," but as someone that didn't get elected, I told you so.
Yeah. Well, I took the numbers of Colorado Springs, and of course, I've got this calling Jeff shooting himself in the foot. Okay. If he votes to cut Medicare, it will involve 5,082 of his constituents that are on Medicare. Okay. Out of the 90,000 veterans living in the district, plus Teller County, there's 47,149 that receive VA benefits. And then on the Medicaid, it's 75,136. Which is a grand total of 167,367 people, also known as voters. And my question, I know how you would vote on the legislation, Joe. I do, but apparently Jeff Crank in this issue has stepped on his crank if he votes for these things. Because how can you defend cutting 167,000 plus people out of the picture for their health care? I mean, that's right here in his district.
Mm-hmm.
So,
And and this is, I think, right. This is the problem with, and to some extent, this is not a party agnostic thing, right? So
no,
this is one of the major issues, and this came up this just actually today, was that Donald Trump and Elon Musk have both come out and said essentially, hey, if you don't go with us, we're gonna fund primary candidates against you.
fine.
But this is it, right? If you're a voter, at
Yeah,
some point, ideology shouldn't matter. We need to look at this and say, is this person going to vote for the party, or are they going to vote for me? And that's the thing. And there are Democratic politicians that do the same thing, where they vote 100% in line with the party, and
right.
that's it, right? They do not care about the impact in the district. They are not representing. They are not leading.
Mm-hmm.
They're simply there. And this was Doug Lamborn for 20 years. 99% of the time voted in line with the party.
Oh, yeah, he was useless.
I mean, he was a rubber stamp. And
Yeah.
this is a continuation of that, of someone that just really wants to go there. He's going to vote the party line every time,
Okay.
even if it
Now,
hurts the district.
the
And as I've
fallacy.
said, and as I've said a number of times, and I want to say, I know I don't mean to interrupt, but like that's my thing, right? I'm going to vote with the Democratic Party most of the time, but I'm voting for El Paso County every time,
Okay.
and that's it.
Well, the fallacy of running or primarying an existing congressional person, the fallacy is you're trying to avoid the voting against the citizens. And if you elect or primary an existing politician where you know where he stands, he has a decision. Am I going to vote for the citizens or I'm going to vote for the party? If he gets primaried out, you've guaranteed you've got somebody who's going to vote for the party.
Yep.
I mean, plain and simple. It hasn't changed anything.
Well, campaign finance report to another one. There's a lot of ways that we can go with this, and
Oh, yeah.
I'm looking at the clock here, and I want to be. We're trying to keep these under a half an hour, and I will just say that one thing I wanted to take an opportunity to plug is, if you are not on the El Paso County Dems blast or any of these other emails, there is an event that's being co-hosted by Indivisible Colorado Springs, the El Paso County Dems, the Progressive Veterans, and the local labor council. It is called the People's Empty Chair Town Hall. That will occur on Monday, March 17th, between 6 and 8 p.m. There is a cap on attendance. There's only 200 people that can fit in that room. This will be streamed online. And interestingly enough, the Democratic blast that I'm looking at does not have a link on how to get there. It might not have been provided yet. The planning on this, I think, started 2 days ago. But I am one of the speakers that will be there, and do plan to listen to folks that have concerns from the community. And that is the purpose of the event. The majority of our time there will be spent taking concerns from the community. And I am going more in my capacity as someone that's working in the nonprofit sector to talk about some of the issues and some of the resources that are available in our community from the nonprofit side that can help folks. I mean, this is everyone, you all are listening because I'm running for Congress in 2 years, but that election is a ways off. And quite frankly, there's over the course,
it's going to be here a lot quicker than you think.
Not if you're having trouble paying the grocery bill. And I think that's the thing that I'm keeping mindful. I know this time is going to go fast because I'm going to be on the campaign running it. But if you're having problems paying the grocery bill, or you're having to make choices around healthcare or rent, then that 2 years is a long ways away. And there are resources in our community that can support that. 211 is a great resource, of course, if you have questions. But that's the intent of this town hall, is to help inform people about some of the resources that exist in the community, to help inform folks like myself as to the issues that we're facing, so that I can go back to the rest of the nonprofit community and share those things, and let our voices be heard. Because Jeff Crank didn't care. He wanted softballs, and he couldn't even answer the softballs. So,
well, he thinks he's still in the time of Joel Heffley, which goes back to, I think they just woke Joel up every once in a while to vote. I have no idea.
Just press the green button.
But just press the green button. But that's why we're here doing these conversations.
That's right.
So we might as well let them know. One thing I would like you to do is crank up an email somewhere, and so we can put it in here.
I know. Yes. So I guess the campaign update is there's some technical things that happen behind the scenes.
Mm-hmm.
I've been taking care of those this past week, so we are up and running, and I do plan to get an email out as soon as I have that link. I have
Mm-hmm.
been working with the planning committee on this event, so I should be able to get some of that details. And like I said, I had my first meeting with her today, so I
Yeah.
think it's still really early in this process. As soon as I have information, I can do that. If you want to go to reganforcolorado.com and sign up there, I will get something out probably late this week.
Say that one more time slowly.
Reaganforcolorado.com.
There you go. Oh, since we're wrapping this thing up, we have less than a minute to go. Jeff Crank had a telephone town hall this past week, and guess what was thousands of people called in, believe it or not. But there was one thing wrong with that statement. And by the way, these are words from Jeff Crank.
Oh, yeah.
I'm not making this stuff up. Thousands called and hundreds of questions were asked, but there was one small problem with it. There was no phone number for them to call. They picked and chose questions and phone numbers or people to talk to. So
In his defense, I did actually speak to some folks, some other congressional offices about it.
Yeah.
And apparently the platform does exist, and the way it works is you click a link essentially, then they call you on your phone, or like if you were like me, you just clicked in on the computer, and that I guess functions. Now, how they took the questions, I don't know how they fielded that, but having listened to it, I will tell you that every single one, not a single question was not a softball. And just out of sheer again, statistics and math. Statistically speaking, at least one of those questions should have been a difficult question, and not a single one was hard.
No, they weren't. My questions weren't even asked. But real quick, wrapping up, since we're running over, this is from a very reliable source. Just spoke with Jeff Crank's D.C. office. They said they used a third-party software that they paid for to host the town hall last night, and there wasn't a phone number to call, but rather they called people, and that they think it was mostly random who the software chose to call. I asked for the name of the software, and they said they weren't authorized to tell me. I asked how the randomization process works, and they said they weren't authorized to tell me. I asked how they got their pool of people to call, and they said they have a list of everyone who calls. So the telephone town hall was him calling people they chose to call, but they won't disclose how the choice of who to call was made. They said that they could maybe put me on a list for next time who would like to be called, but how is that random?
So the only reason I'm not going to criticize the platform is I think Bennett's using the same one tomorrow night, and I'm curious to see how that one goes.
Okay.
Because I would say what that statement is my understanding is truthful up until the point where we didn't know who we were calling. I don't buy that one.
Yeah. Okay.
So I am curious. I do think, like I said, the platform stuff is accurate. I believe that's something that's used by multiple congressional offices, but which would tell me that the ability to control it, that is questionable to me. I will be curious to see how Bennett's goes tomorrow night. And
you might say that's Senator Bennett, so nobody thinks it's just Bennett.
So, you are correct. Yes, Senator Bennett is hosting a town hall tomorrow evening, and he, I believe, he is using the same, if not a similar platform. I'm not 100% certain.
Well, Joe, we just shot through 32 minutes and 45 seconds here. And what we're going to do is with the delta, speaking of math, of $2, 2 minutes and 45 seconds, we're going to add it on to next week or
Sounds
our
like a
next
plan.
session. Okay? So, Joe, thank you very much. Any last words real quick?
I hope to see you all at that town hall. And again, please sign up. Would love to keep people informed as to what we're doing. But be good out there. Be good to each other.
Okay. Thank you very much.
Thank you.